I never thought a simple weekend BBQ could turn into a full-blown neighborhood war. But that's exactly what happened when Karen Dawson, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, decided to make my life a living nightmare. It all started on a quiet Saturday morning in Willow Creek Estates, a picture-perfect suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. The sun was shining, the lawns were freshly mowed, and the smell of summer was in the air. My wife Emily was in the kitchen marinating ribs. My son Ethan was bouncing around the living room wearing his Little League baseball cap, and I was out in the backyard setting up the grill. This wasn't just any ordinary BBQ. It was supposed to be a small celebration. Ethan's baseball team had just won their first championship game of the season, and a couple of our close friends, Jake and Melissa Thompson, were coming over with their kids. I had it all planned out. Good food, cold drinks, music playing softly in the background, and kids running around the yard. Nothing crazy, just family, friends, and a little summer fun. But here's the thing about living in Willow Creek Estates. Fun has a limit, and that limit has a name, Patricia Patty Dawson. Though around here, everyone just calls her Karen. If you've never dealt with a real-life Karen, let me paint the picture for you. Imagine someone who wakes up every morning looking for problems, armed with a notebook, a smartphone camera, and a deep, undying love for enforcing HOA rules. Patty has been on the HOA board for years, and she treats the community handbook like it's the Constitution. She's the kind of neighbor who will measure the height of your grass, count the number of cars in your driveway, and email the HOA if she thinks your Christmas lights are too bright. And unfortunately, her house sits right next door to mine. Over the years, I've learned to pick my battles. I've ignored her passive-aggressive comments, her nosy questions, and her constant reminders about community standards. But this time was different. This wasn't just about me. This was about my family, my friends, and celebrating something important to us. I wasn't going to let a controlling neighbor ruin it. The plan was simple. Keep the gathering small, keep the music low, and keep things wrapped up before 9 p.m. I even double-checked the HOA handbook the night before, just to make sure we weren't breaking any rules. According to the guidelines, outdoor gatherings are permitted so long as noise levels remain reasonable and do not exceed community quiet hours beginning at 10 p.m. Perfect. We'd be done way before that. Or so I thought. Because what I didn't know was that Patty had already been watching me from her upstairs window, sipping her morning coffee, plotting her next move. The first sign of trouble came around noon, right as I was lighting the grill. I heard the sound of her screen door creak open, followed by her signature warning cough, that fake little throat clear she uses whenever she's about to start trouble. I turned around and there she was, standing at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, sunglasses on, lips pursed so tight they could cut glass. "Michael," she said flatly, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I couldn't help but notice all the activity in your backyard this morning." I smiled politely, trying to diffuse the tension. "Hey, Patty. Yeah, we're just having a few friends over later. Nothing big, just a little celebration for Ethan's baseball team." She didn't smile back. In fact, her jaw clenched tighter. She muttered, glancing at my setup like I was building an illegal nightclub in my backyard. "Well, HOA guidelines strictly limit outdoor gatherings. Anything that causes excessive noise, smoke, or disturbances could result in a violation notice." I paused for a moment, trying to choose my words carefully. "I checked the handbook, Patty. We're within the rules. We're keeping it small and quiet, I promise." That's when she gave me that fake smile, the one that doesn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said sweetly, "I guess we'll just have to see about that." And with that, she turned on her heel and marched back into her house. I should have known right then. The battle had already begun. By 2 p.m., the BBQ was in full swing. The smell of smoked ribs filled the air. The kids were laughing, and soft country music played from a speaker on the patio. Everyone was having a good time. I was flipping burgers on the grill, Emily was setting out plates, and Jake was handing me an ice-cold beer when I noticed it, the flicker of movement from Patty's upstairs window. She was watching us, phone in hand, camera pointed directly at my backyard. I whispered to Jake, Look at this. She's actually recording us. Jake glanced up and chuckled. Man, your neighbor's intense. You sure she's not with the FBI? We laughed it off at first, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just casual spying. Patty was gathering evidence. She wasn't going to complain, she was going to build a case. About an hour later, things escalated. As the kids were running through the sprinkler, I heard a loud, piercing, "Ahem!" from behind me. I turned around, and there she was again, standing right at the edge of my lawn, hands on her hips, like she owned the place. "Into Michael," she called out loudly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of us are trying to enjoy our weekend without all this chaos. I forced a polite smile and said, "Patty, we're just having a small get-together. We'll keep it down. Don't worry." Her eyes narrowed. "I certainly hope so, because if this continues, I'll have no choice but to contact the HOA board." "You wouldn't want that, would you?" I wanted to snap back. I wanted to tell her to mind her own business. But I kept my cool. The last thing I wanted was to give her any ammunition. What I didn't realize at the time was that Patty had already called them. That night, after everyone left and the backyard was quiet, I thought we were in the clear. But 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and froze. Inside was a bright orange envelope with big black letters on the front. "Notice of violation, HOA complaint." My stomach dropped. I ripped it open and started reading. According to the letter, I hosted an unauthorized gathering that disrupted community peace, violated noise ordinances, and generated excessive smoke. The notice warned that if I failed to comply with community guidelines, I'd be fined $250, and if there was a repeat offense, the fines would increase. I couldn't believe it. We hadn't even broken a single rule. And I knew exactly who was behind it: Patty. But this was just the beginning. What happened next would turn a simple BBQ celebration into a full-scale war between me, my family, and the most powerful HOA Karen in Texas. And trust me, she had no idea who she was messing with. I stood there on my front porch, gripping that bright orange envelope in my hand like it was a bomb about to go off. My wife Emily came up behind me, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and asked, "What's wrong?" I handed her the letter without saying a word. She scanned it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to anger. "What? Unauthorized gathering? Excessive smoke? They're threatening to fine us?" She looked up at me, her voice sharp. "Michael, this is ridiculous. We didn't break any rules." I nodded, jaw tight. "I know exactly what's happening. This is Patty. She complained to the HOA, and now they're coming after us." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "She's unbelievable. What are we going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't paying a single cent for something I didn't do. The next morning, I called the HOA office. After sitting through 10 minutes of painfully cheerful hold music, I finally got connected to Linda, the HOA's administrative assistant. "Hi, Linda. This is Michael Carter from Willow Creek," I started, trying to sound calm. "I received a violation notice about a BBQ I hosted this past weekend, but I believe there's been a mistake. Our gathering was small, quiet, and ended well before community quiet hours." Linda clicked her keyboard for a moment before responding. According to our records, the complaint was filed by one of your neighbors. She submitted a written statement and photo evidence showing a large gathering and excessive smoke." I clenched my fist. "Photo evidence? You mean Patty Dawson's stalker shots from her upstairs window?" Linda hesitated before replying. "I can't disclose who filed the complaint, Mr. Carter." I laughed bitterly. "You don't need to. I already know." Linda lowered her voice slightly, as if she was about to break some kind of secret. "Look, between you and me, if you want to fight this, you'll need to attend the next HOA board meeting and present your case directly. Otherwise, the fine will stand." That was all I needed to hear. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at the community clubhouse. I walked in wearing a plain polo and jeans, clutching a folder full of printed HOA guidelines, screenshots of text messages, and statements from Jake and Melissa confirming that we'd followed the rules. As I stepped inside, I spotted her immediately: Patty Dawson. sitting in the front row, arms crossed, smug little smile on her face like she'd already won. At the head of the table sat Mr. Reynolds, the HOA president, a silver-haired, soft-spoken man in his 60s, who always looked like he'd rather be golfing than running a homeowners association. Beside him were 3 other board members, all flipping through their paperwork. When my turn came, I stood up, cleared my throat, and calmly explained everything. I walked them through the timeline. We'd invited only 2 families. Music was kept at a reasonable volume. The gathering ended by 8:30 p.m., well before the quiet hour cutoff. There was no excessive smoke. I used a gas grill, not a fire pit. I handed over my evidence and finished with, "We respected the community rules. This violation isn't just unfair, it's personal." That's when Patty stood up. "Personal? Oh, please," she scoffed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have every right to report violations when I see them. That's what the HOA handbook says. And frankly, I don't appreciate having to deal with loud, disruptive parties when some of us are trying to enjoy a peaceful weekend." I turned to face her. "Patty, with all due respect, it wasn't a party. It was a family BBQ. We were well within the rules." She shook her head, eyes blazing. "Rules exist for a reason, Michael. If we let you get away with it, everyone will start bending them. Then what happens? Chaos, noise, trash, lower property values. We're trying to maintain standards here." The room went silent. Mr. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. "All right," he said finally. "We'll review the evidence and make a decision. You'll receive a written response within the week." I left the meeting boiling inside. Patty had practically accused me of destroying the neighborhood's quality of life over some burgers and ribs. But I also walked out with a fire lit under me. If she wanted to play this game, I was ready. 2 days later, the HOA's decision arrived in my mailbox. I tore the envelope open and read the letter out loud to Emily. After reviewing submitted evidence and community guidelines, the HOA board has decided to uphold the violation. A fine of $250 will remain in place. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They sided with her. They actually sided with her. Emily grabbed the paper from my hand and read it again, shaking her head. "This is insane. We followed the rules to the letter." That night, I sat on the patio with Jake, venting over a couple of beers. "She's got them wrapped around her finger," I said, slamming my bottle on the table. "The HOA isn't protecting the community. They're protecting her." Jake leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Then maybe it's time we start protecting ourselves." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. "We fight back, not with yelling, not with drama, with facts, with their own rules." "You said you read the handbook, right?" I nodded slowly. "Then we find a loophole, something they can't dispute, something that turns this whole thing back on her." Over the next week, I practically memorized the entire HOA handbook. Page by page, rule by rule, I studied everything I could. That's when I founded Section 4, Subsection C, Clause 12. It stated, "Any neighbor who files repeated complaints without clear and verifiable evidence of violations may be subject to disciplinary action, including suspension of HOA privileges." My heart raced as I read it over and over. That was it. That was the key. Because here's the thing. Patty didn't just report me. She'd reported 3 other families on our street in the past 6 months. One for having Halloween decorations too early, another for leaving trash cans out past pickup day, and one poor guy for having a non-neutral paint color on his shutters. I reached out to them, and every single one of them still had their violation letters. Together, we gathered the evidence and prepared a joint complaint against Patty Dawson. The next HOA meeting was a showdown. I walked in with Jake, Melissa, and 3 other neighbors at my side. Patty was already there, sitting in the front row again, but this time her smile didn't look so confident. When my turn came, I stood up and addressed the board directly. "I have here documented proof that Patricia Dawson has filed 4 separate complaints against 4 different households in the last 6 months, 3 of which were dismissed due to lack of evidence. according to Section 4, subsection C, Clause 12 of our own community guidelines. This pattern constitutes harassment and misuse of HOA reporting privileges. Gasps rippled through the room. Patty's face turned crimson. This is outrageous. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood in order. I didn't even look at her. I just handed my packet of evidence to Mr. Reynolds and stepped back. The board went into a private deliberation for 10 long, silent minutes. When they returned, Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat and read their decision. Effective immediately, the violation against Michael Carter has been dismissed. The $250 fine is revoked. Furthermore, Patricia Dawson is hereby suspended from filing further complaints for a period of 6 months. I could feel the weight lift off my shoulders. Patty, meanwhile, stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath. But here's the thing about HOA Karens. They don't forget. They plot. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because if there's one thing I've learned about Patty Dawson, it's that she always finds a way to strike back. And when she does, the fight is going to get ugly. For a few days, life in Willow Creek Estates felt peaceful. Too peaceful. The HOA had dismissed the violation. The fine was revoked, and Patty Dawson and my overbearing, self-appointed neighborhood sheriff had been temporarily stripped of her complaint privileges. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd actually won. But deep down, I knew better. Patty wasn't the kind of person who let things go. She wasn't just annoyed that I'd beaten her. She was humiliated. And when people like Patty feel humiliated, they don't just get mad, they get even. It started small. 3 days after the HOA ruling, I came out to grab the morning paper and found my trash cans tipped over in the driveway. At first, I thought maybe raccoons had gotten into them. But when it happened again the next morning, and this time the lids were stacked neatly against my garage door, I knew it wasn't an accident. Then came the anonymous complaint letters. Not HOA violations, not official warnings, just typed notes stuffed into my mailbox, unsigned. Some of us actually care about keeping our neighborhood respectable. Your family's constant noise is lowering property values. You don't belong here. Emily found the third one, and when she read it, her hands were shaking. This is harassment, Michael, she said, her voice trembling. She's trying to push us out. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. She wants me to snap, Em. That's her goal. If I lose my cool, she wins. We play this smart. But things were about to get a lot worse. One Friday evening, just after sunset, I was out back grilling chicken when I smelled a smoke. Not from my grill, but from somewhere nearby. I turned around and froze. There, behind my fence, was Patty Dawson, standing in her backyard with her phone out, pointing it directly at me filming. And behind her, a small fire pit, blazing and throwing thick smoke into the air. I walked to the edge of my yard, waving my arms. Patty, what are you doing? She didn't respond. She just smiled, raised her phone higher, and shouted loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Look at this. He's starting another smoke hazard. I'm documenting everything. I stared at her, stunned. That's your fire pit making the smoke. She actually laughed. Prove it, Michael. And that's when it hit me. She was trying to frame me. The next morning, I woke up to another bright orange envelope from the HOA in my mailbox. Notice of violation, excessive smoke complaint. I almost tore the letter in half right there. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered under my breath. Emily read over my shoulder and slammed the paper onto the counter. This is insane. They're just taking her word for it again? I grabbed my phone and dialed Linda at the HOA office. Listen, I said, trying not to shout. Patty Dawson is staging fake evidence to get us fined. She set up a fire pit in her own yard last night, filmed the smoke, and reported it as ours. Linda sighed on the other end. Michael, we have to investigate every complaint we receive. But if you have proof, submit it and we'll review it. That's when I made a decision. If Patty wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I called up Jake and asked to borrow one of his security cameras. Within an hour, I had 2 motion-activated cameras mounted, one facing my backyard, the other facing Patty's property line. If she so much as breathed in the wrong direction, I'd have video evidence. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the cameras caught her in the act. At exactly 7:42 p.m., Patty walked into her yard, lit the fire pit, waved her phone around like she was filming, and then turned directly toward my house, muttering under her breath, "Let's see how you like getting another fine, Carter." I almost laughed when I watched the footage. Almost. Instead, I emailed the video straight to Linda with the subject line, "Proof of harassment and false complaints." The following week, the HOA held a special meeting. This time, I didn't go alone. I brought Jake, Melissa, and 2 other neighbors who'd also been victims of Patty's complaint spree. When we walked in, I could already feel the tension. Half the room was whispering, throwing side eyes, waiting for fireworks. Patty was sitting in the front row, legs crossed, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Mr. Reynolds, the HOA president, cleared his throat. "We've received credible evidence regarding repeated, unsubstantiated complaints filed by one of our board members." Patty shifted uncomfortably, but kept her chin high. Then they played the video. You could have heard a pin drop. There she was, on a big projector screen, lighting her own fire pit, recording the smoke, and whispering threats to the camera. When the footage ended, the room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, whispers. A couple of neighbors even clapped quietly. Patty stood up, pointing at me, her voice cracking. "This is out of context. He's manipulating you. He's been targeting me since day one." But Mr. Reynolds raised his hand. "That's enough, Mrs. Dawson. We've seen the evidence. The board has decided to remove you from your position effective immediately. You are suspended from filing any HOA-related complaints for 1 full year." I swear, I've never seen her face so red in my life. She grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out of the clubhouse. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually applauded. For a few weeks after that, things were quiet. No letters, no spying, no anonymous complaints. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek Estates, I could finally breathe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because people like Patty, they don't just quit, they wait. And when she finally came back, she wouldn't just be filing complaints. She'd be going for revenge. And next time, it wouldn't just be about me. It would involve the entire neighborhood. For a few short, blissful weeks, Willow Creek Estates felt like the peaceful suburban dream we'd always wanted. No warning letters, no spying, no HOA fines shoved into my mailbox. After the special board meeting where Patty Dawson got exposed and stripped of her HOA power, it felt like we'd finally won. Emily and I could breathe again. We had dinners on the patio without peeking over the fence. The kids played outside without whispers of noise complaints. And for the first time in months, life was normal. But here's the thing about people like Patty. They don't quit. They plot. And while we were enjoying our little victory, Patty was already preparing for round 2. The first sign came one Saturday morning when I was mowing the lawn. I noticed 3 of my neighbors, people I'd known for years, standing on the sidewalk across the street, huddled together, whispering. The moment they saw me, they stopped talking, glanced at each other, and walked away without a word. At first, I brushed it off, but then Emily came in from the grocery store later that day, slamming the bags on the counter. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her cheeks flushed. "Patty was in the parking lot telling people we're troublemakers. She's saying we're trying to destroy the HOA and ruin property values." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Of course she is. She's building a narrative." Emily crossed her arms. "She's building an army." By the end of the week, I realized she wasn't just spreading rumors, she was organizing. One evening, Jake came over holding his phone. "Dude, you need to see this." He handed it to me, and my stomach dropped. On his screen was a Facebook group called Protect Willow Creek HOA, created by none other than Patty Dawson. The group had over 40 members already. The posts were filled with angry comments. "The Carters think they're above the rules. Our neighborhood used to be peaceful before they moved in. If we don't stop them, Willow Creek will turn into chaos." I scrolled further and saw Patty's own pinned post. "Neighbors, The HOA board has failed us. They let rule breakers get away with disrespecting our community. We can't rely on them anymore. We need to take action ourselves. I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding. This wasn't just gossip anymore. Patty was rallying people against us. Over the next few days, little things started happening that made it clear her influence was growing. One morning, I woke up to find eggs smashed against my garage door. 2 days later, someone left a flyer on my windshield that read, "Move out or face consequences." Emily was terrified. Our son, Ethan, started asking questions like, "Dad, why are people mad at us?" And that broke me. This wasn't just about a BBQ anymore. This was war. I decided to fight back, but smartly, no shouting, no Facebook battles, no drama. I started talking to the neighbors I trusted, quietly explaining what really happened. A few of them already suspected Patty was manipulating people. Others were on the fence, confused by her half-truths and exaggerations. Meanwhile, Jake dug deeper into the Protect Willow Creek HOA group and discovered something shocking. Patty wasn't just venting online. She was planning a petition to have me and my family formally sanctioned by the HOA. According to her latest post, if we get 60% of the neighborhood to sign, we can demand an emergency vote to impose fines, restrictions, and even force repeat offenders out. I couldn't believe it. She was actually trying to kick us out of our own home. The next HOA board meeting was chaos before it even started. When I arrived, the parking lot was full, and a crowd had gathered outside the clubhouse, neighbors yelling and pointing fingers at each other. The air was electric with tension. Inside, the atmosphere was even worse. Half the room was glaring at me like I was the villain. The other half sat quietly, avoiding eye contact, afraid to take sides. Patty walked in last, wearing a bright red blazer, like she was leading a political campaign. She had a stack of papers clutched in her hands, the petition. When the meeting started, she stood up before anyone else could speak. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice loud and sharp, "I am officially submitting this petition on behalf of over 40 homeowners demanding disciplinary action against the Carters for repeatedly disturbing the peace, defying community standards, and attacking me personally." Gasps rippled through the room. I shot to my feet. "That's a lie, and you know it." Patty's fake smile widened. "Oh, I have evidence, Michael. Do you want me to show everyone your so-called innocent BBQ party? Or should we discuss the video you conveniently edited to make me look guilty?" The room erupted in murmurs, half the neighbors suddenly whispering to each other. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I didn't edit anything. The board reviewed the footage, and it proved you staged a smoke complaint. That's why they removed you from the HOA board in the first place." Patty waved her hand dismissively. "That was a witch hunt, and everyone here knows it. This neighborhood used to have order, and now it's falling apart because of people like you who think the rules don't apply to them." Mr. Reynolds raised his hand to quiet the room. "Enough. Both of you. The board will review the petition and the claims, but until we have verified evidence, no disciplinary action will be taken." Patty's smile faltered for just a second, but I knew she wasn't giving up. That night after the meeting, Emily sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "Michael, how far is she willing to go?" I sat across from her, rubbing my temples. "As far as it takes. This isn't just about HOA rules anymore. This is personal for her." Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Then we need to be ready for anything." And he was right, because 2 days later, Patty made her boldest move yet. I woke up early on Tuesday to the sound of loud banging outside. At first I thought it was construction, but when I looked out the window, my blood ran cold. Patty was standing in the middle of my driveway, holding a clipboard, surrounded by 5 of her supporters. She was going door to door with her petition, telling everyone I was destroying the neighborhood. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked outside. "Patty, you're trespassing. You need to leave my property." She turned to me with that smug, practiced smile. "I'm not trespassing, Michael. I'm informing our neighbors about your repeated violations." You mean the violations you made up? I snapped. One of her supporters shouted from the sidewalk. We're tired of people like you lowering property values. The shouting drew more neighbors out onto their porches. Within minutes, half the street was outside. Voices rising, people arguing, fingers pointing. Willow Creek had officially become a battleground. That night, I got an email from the HOA. The subject line made my stomach drop. Emergency hearing scheduled potential legal action. The board had decided to hold a closed-door session the following week to determine whether escalating conflicts between residents constitute grounds for fines, injunctions, or other remedies under community bylaws. Translation? They were considering taking this to court. Patty had pushed this fight to the brink. And I knew one thing for sure, if I didn't stop her now, we could actually lose our home. But here's the twist Patty didn't see coming. I had a plan. And this time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was going on the offense. The day of the HOA emergency hearing felt like waiting for a storm you could see building on the horizon, but couldn't avoid. Emily barely touched her breakfast. Our son, Ethan, kept asking why we had to go to court, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth that one neighbor's vendetta had turned our quiet little community into a battlefield. By noon, Jake arrived at our house with a folder in his hands. I got everything, he said, setting it on the table. Inside were printouts, screenshots, and security footage proof that Patty had lied, manipulated, and orchestrated this entire mess. This is it, I said, flipping through the documents. We go in there calm, confident, and ready to expose her. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled as she poured herself coffee. Michael, what if they don't believe us? What if Patty wins? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then we fight harder. But today we end this. By 5 p.m., the clubhouse parking lot was packed. The HOA board had made the hearing closed door, but that didn't stop dozens of neighbors from gathering outside, whispering, speculating, and waiting for the outcome. Inside, the room was cold, tense, and silent. The 5 members of the HOA board sat at a long table, their faces unreadable. At the far end, Patty Dawson sat with 2 of her loyal supporters, looking smug and unshakable in her bright yellow blazer. Mr. Reynolds, the HOA president, cleared his throat. We are here to discuss escalating conflicts within Willow Creek Estates, specifically allegations of repeated violations, harassment, and misconduct. Patty immediately stood, placing her petition folder on the table. Let's stop sugarcoating this, she said, her voice sharp. Michael Carter has constantly broken community rules, disturbed the peace, and even threatened me personally. I clenched my fists under the table, but forced myself to stay calm. She pulled out a USB stick and handed it to the board's tech officer. I have video evidence, she announced confidently. Seconds later, grainy footage appeared on the projector screen. It showed me standing in my backyard during the BBQ, except in this video. There were loud, distorted sounds and thick smoke effects edited in. Gas filled the room. That's fake, I said, standing up. That video has been altered. Patty smirked. Of course you'd say that. I turned to Mr. Reynolds. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to show the board the unaltered security footage from my own cameras. He nodded, and I handed over Jake's USB drive. Seconds later, the truth was on display. The real footage showed a calm BBQ, normal noise levels, and no excessive smoke. You could even hear Patty in the background laughing with her friend and saying her plan out loud. Don't worry, once I file the complaint, the HOA will hit them hard. The board members leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Patty's smile faltered. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out the next piece of evidence, screenshots of Patty's secret Facebook group, Protect Willow Creek HOA. I showed the board her posts where she bragged about destroying the Carters, forcing them out, and teaching them a lesson. Finally, I handed over Jake's email log proof that Patty had sent multiple fake complaints from anonymous accounts, all traced back to her IP address. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Patty's face had gone pale. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's when something completely unexpected happened. Melissa Green, one of Patty's closest allies, suddenly stood up. I can't do this anymore. she said, her voice shaking. Patty made me sign those complaints. She told us if we didn't back her up, she'd start spreading rumors about our families too. The room erupted in whispers. Patty spun toward Melissa, her eyes wide. Melissa, shut up! You don't know what you're talking about. Melissa took a deep breath. I do, and I have text messages to prove it. She pulled out her phone and handed it to Mr. Reynolds, who scanned through the messages silently before passing it to the rest of the board. Patty's voice cracked as she tried to interrupt. This is a setup. They're all lying. You can't do this to me. But it was too late. The board president raised his hand for silence. Mrs. Dawson, based on the evidence presented today, including your manipulation of neighbors, falsified complaints, and harassment, the HOA board is placing you on probation effective immediately. You are hereby stripped of any voting power or influence within this association. The crowd outside must have heard the decision because within seconds, loud cheers erupted beyond the walls. Patty, however, didn't move. She just sat there trembling, her lips pressed into a thin line. And then, she whispered something under her breath. I'll never forget. This isn't over. We thought that would be the end of it. We thought Patty's power was finally broken. But that night, everything changed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed. Emily clutched my arm, whispering, Michael, what was that? I crept down the stairs, every nerve on edge, and found our front window smashed shards of glass glittering on the floor. On the porch, taped to the doorframe, was a single note written in thick black marker. You think you won. You have no idea what's coming. I froze, staring at the words, my mind spinning. Patty had lost her HOA power, but she wasn't done. This wasn't just about fines anymore. This was personal revenge. And as I stood there in the shattered silence of my living room, I realized something terrifying. The HOA battle was over. But the real war was about to begin. For 2 nights after the window was smashed, we barely slept. Every creak of the house, every car driving by, every gust of wind sent my heart racing. Emily kept checking the locks 3-4 times a night, while I sat by the living room window with the bat across my lap. I kept telling myself maybe it wasn't Patty, maybe it was random vandalism. But deep down, I knew better. The note taped to my door said everything. You think you won, you have no idea what's coming. And knowing Patty, that wasn't just a warning. That was a promise. On the 3rd night, around 1:17 a.m., the cameras caught her. I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through security feeds, when I saw movement on the backyard camera. I zoomed in, and there she was, Patty Dawson. She was dressed in black from head to toe, crouched near the fence line, holding what looked like a can of spray paint. My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone and whispered upstairs to Emily, "Call 911, now." I slipped out the back door as quietly as I could, keeping to the shadows. But before I could even get halfway across the yard, she noticed the red glow of the security camera and froze. For a split second, our eyes locked, and then she bolted. I chased her as far as the cul-de-sac, but she was fast, far faster than I expected, and by the time I rounded the corner, she was gone. When the police finally arrived, I showed them the footage. Officer Daniels, a tall, broad guy with a calm voice, frowned as he watched Patty's shadowy figure on the screen. "That's pretty damning," he said, glancing at me. "But unless she's caught in the act of property damage or trespassing inside your yard, this isn't enough for an arrest." Emily's voice broke as she asked, "So she just gets to keep doing this?" Daniel sighed. "We'll increase patrols, but if you want real protection, file for a restraining order. That'll give us grounds to act if she steps foot near your property." And so, the next morning, that's exactly what I did. I thought that would keep her away. I was wrong. 3 nights later, around 2:45 a.m., we woke to a deafening boom. The house shook. Ethan screamed from his room upstairs. Emily grabbed him as I ran toward the garage, and that's when I saw it. The side of my SUV was completely engulfed in flames. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and started spraying, coughing through the thick smoke, while Emily screamed for the neighbors to call 911. Jake came running with his own extinguisher, and together we managed to contain the fire before it reached the house. When the firefighters arrived, one of them pulled me aside. "This wasn't an accident," he said grimly. "That much accelerant? Somebody wanted this thing to burn." I didn't even have to guess who. The next morning, Officer Daniels came back with 2 detectives. "Michael," he said, setting a folder on my kitchen table, "we need to ask you a serious question. Has anyone made threats against you recently?" I almost laughed. "How much time do you have?" I explained everything: the BBQ party, the fines, the hearing, the smashed window, the spray paint, the note, everything. Daniels listened quietly, nodding, until I finished. Then he flipped open the folder and slid a photo across the table. I froze. It was from a nearby gas station's security camera. Patty Dawson, in a dark hoodie, buying 2 red gas cans, less than an hour before the fire. That was the moment everything shifted. The HOA had been a nightmare. Patty's harassment had been exhausting. But this was arson. This was felony territory. And for the first time since this all began, Patty had gone too far. 2 days later, the police showed up at her house with a warrant. The entire cul-de-sac watched as Patty Dawson was let out in handcuffs, screaming at the top of her lungs. "This is a setup. He framed me. He's destroying this neighborhood." Some neighbors cheered. Others whispered nervously, unsure of what to believe. I stood there on my porch, arms crossed, watching her disappear into the back of the police cruiser. For the first time in months, I actually let myself breathe. I thought maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. But I was wrong. 3 weeks later, we got a letter from the HOA. I opened it at the kitchen table, expecting some update about neighborhood safety. Instead, my jaw dropped as I read the first line aloud. "Dear residents, effective immediately, the HOA board has voted to suspend Michael Carter's membership privileges pending investigation." I blinked, stunned. "What investigation?" Emily grabbed the letter from my hands, reading it frantically. "They're accusing us of insurance fraud, Michael. They think we staged the car fire to collect a payout." I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd been through, they were turning this on me. I stormed down to the HOA office the next morning, slammed the letter onto Linda's desk, and demanded answers. Linda looked exhausted, her voice low as she said, "Patty's lawyers are painting you as the aggressor, Michael. They're claiming you set the fire yourself to frame her." I laughed bitterly. "She's in jail, Linda." Linda shook her head. "She posted bail yesterday." My stomach dropped. Patty was back. That night, I stepped onto my porch and looked across the street. There she was, standing in the shadows by her driveway, arms folded, staring at my house. No smile, no yelling. Just staring. I felt Emily come up behind me, whispering, "Michael, this isn't going to stop, is it?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, my voice low, my chest tight. "This isn't over. Not even close." And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. "You should have moved when you had the chance." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Because the number wasn't Patty's. It was someone else. Someone I didn't even know. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just Patty anymore. There was someone bigger. Someone pulling the strings. And they weren't done with us yet. For a week after Patty's arrest, I thought things would finally calm down. The HOA had gone silent. The neighborhood was quiet. And for the first time in months, I could walk outside without feeling like a target. But that text message, "You should have moved when you had the chance," wouldn't leave my head. It wasn't from Patty. It wasn't a random prank. It was something else. Something worse. 2 days later, I was driving home from work when I noticed a black SUV parked near the end of my street. No plates, dark tinted windows. I slowed down as I passed, trying not to get a look, but the vehicle didn't move. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same SUV rolled slowly past my house, headlights off. The next morning, I checked the footage from Jake's security cameras. The SUV had circled the block 3 times between 1 and 3 a.m. I called Officer Daniels immediately. "I think someone's watching my house," I said. Daniels came by that afternoon, looked at the footage and frowned. "That's not Patty," he said, almost to himself. "This looks organized." I raised an eyebrow. "Organized? What do you mean?" Daniels hesitated before leaning in. "Look, off the record, there's been an investigation into Willow Creek Estates for months now. Property disputes, money going missing, suspicious HOA dealings. Someone way bigger than Patty is pulling strings here." My stomach dropped. "Bigger than Patty?" I repeated slowly. He nodded. "Way bigger." That night, Jake came over. I showed him the footage of the SUV and told him what Daniels had said. Jake's face went pale. "Michael, you remember how Patty always bragged about having connections inside the HOA? I think she was telling the truth." "What if she's just the front?" Emily chimed in from across the kitchen. "Front for what?" Jake lowered his voice, almost whispering. "For Mark Sullivan." I froze. Mark Sullivan was the HOA's treasurer, the guy who controlled all the community funds. He was quiet, polite, always wore perfectly pressed shirts, the kind of guy you'd never suspect. But Jake had been doing some digging of his own. "Patty's obsession with you," he explained, "wasn't personal at first. It was strategic. Mark wanted you gone because your property sits on one of the only lots where he's been planning a private real estate deal." I shook my head slowly. "Wait, are you saying this entire war started over land?" Jake nodded grimly. "And it's not just land. It's money laundering through HOA funds. I've seen the records." Emily gasped. "Oh my God!" I thought it sounded crazy. I thought Jake was exaggerating. Until the package arrived. The next morning, I found a small, unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a note that said, "You don't know who you're dealing with. Watch this before it's too late." I plugged the drive into my laptop and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was hidden camera footage from inside the HOA office. The video showed Mark Sullivan sitting at a table with Patty and 2 other board members. Mark leaned forward, speaking low but clear. "If Carter doesn't leave quietly, we escalate. File complaints, fake violations, harass him until he cracks. He won't last 6 months." Patty nodded, grinning like a loyal soldier. One of the other board members asked, "What if he fights back?" Mark's answer chilled me to the bone. "Then we ruin him. Financially, legally, whatever it takes." I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't neighbor drama. This was a coordinated attack. I called Officer Daniels immediately and handed him the USB drive. By the next morning, 3 unmarked police cars were parked outside the HOA office. Investigators carried out boxes of documents, computers, and financial records. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, something unexpected happened. That night, I got another message from the same unknown number. This one wasn't a threat. It was a warning. "They know you went to the cops. Leave town now if you want your family safe." I showed it to Daniels the next morning. He frowned and said, "That's not Mark. That's someone inside trying to help you." But if there was someone on the inside, that meant Mark wasn't alone. There were more people involved. And they weren't just playing HOA games anymore. 3 nights later, the nightmare escalated. It was just past midnight when the motion sensor lights outside flicked on. I glanced at the monitor and froze. 3 figures in dark clothing were walking slowly across my front yard. I shouted for Emily to grab Ethan and get upstairs, then grabbed my bat and ran to the front door. Before I could even open it, there was a loud bang. They were trying to kick the door in. Call 911, I yelled to Emily as I braced myself against the door. The figures pounded once more before retreating into the darkness, just as police sirens approached. By the time Daniels arrived, they were gone, vanished without a trace. The next morning, Daniels came to my house looking more serious than ever. "Michael," he said quietly, "you're not dealing with Patty anymore. This is bigger than you, bigger than Willow Creek. We're talking organized crime using HOAs as a front for money laundering." I swallowed hard. What does that mean for us?" Daniels hesitated before answering. "Well, it means," he sighed, "you're on their radar now." I stood there in silence, feeling the weight of it all sink in. Patty had started this war. But Mark was the one controlling it. And now whoever was behind him, whoever sent that warning, was watching me too. This wasn't about a BBQ anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about power, money, and control. And as I looked out my window at the quiet, perfectly trimmed lawns of Willow Creek Estates, I realized something terrifying. This neighborhood wasn't safe anymore. Not for me, not for Emily, not for Ethan. And if we didn't find a way to expose the entire operation, we wouldn't just lose our home. We could lose everything.